And to the latest in these race wars. A New Zealand town has banned James Cook, a bit late perhaps, but you see, it's still picking a fight with the British explorer who first mapped that coast, which was an incredible feat of navigation. An Australian replica of Cook's Endeavour, the ship he used, is part of a flotilla that's circumnavigating New Zealand over the next month to acknowledge the first onshore encounters between Maori and whites 250 years ago. Now, they were going to land, among other places, in a particular town in the North Island, but that stop was cancelled by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage. Apparently they don't like heritage that much, after complaints from Indigenous figures that Cook was not welcome because he was actually, in the words of one of the Maori leaders there, he was a barbarian. He was a barbarian, he said, who brought murder and rape with him. Joining me is the panel, Liberal Senator James Patterson and former Labor National President Warren Mundine, now with the Liberals. Warren, banning James Cook's replica ship 250 years later, fair enough?
I think it's a bit immature. You look at Cook. Cook was one of the great navigators of history. He sailed from England, he travelled for the South Pacific, he mapped areas, he did a whole lot of incredible stuff. And this idea that he comes out and rapes and pillages and that, well, that's just a load of rubbish. It's something that they need to acknowledge and celebrate in regard to the meeting of Captain Cook and the Maori groups there. Otherwise, when you look at it, where did the Westminster government come from, model in New Zealand? Where did a whole heap of other things come from? You know, you need to look at history and learn from the history. And there are some very good things about Captain Cook.
And also, James Patterson, isn't it the case, look, my knowledge of New Zealand history is not as great as I'd wish, but didn't the Maori tribes actually ask the British, willingly form a coalition with the British, form New Zealand in the Treaty of Waitangi to help them stop intertribal warfare, among other things?
Like you, Andrew, I don't claim to be an expert in New Zealand history and probably not enough of an expert to weigh into their history wars, but I can see some fairly strong parallels with our own debates about history in Australia. And what they essentially boil down to is, was it a good thing that Europeans discovered Australia? Was it a good thing that the British settled Australia? Now, I'm not saying for a second that we are a perfect country or that we have a perfect history, but on the ledger of history, I think you can say that the discovery and establishment of Australia as the modern nation that it is today is a net positive and something that's worthy of celebration and something that's important that we teach to our children and pass on to our children. And this idea that you can ban Captain Cook from your village or ignore the fact that he did circumnavigate New Zealand and Australia is a really silly notion that will just cheapen our understanding of our own history.